You've been told to submit, to follow his lead, and to respect him. But no one ever told you that those teachings only apply to one part of the marriage. If you're confused about what submission is supposed to look like, you're not alone. A lot of Christian wives are stuck trying to apply Bible verses about marriage in a way God never actually designed. That's what's coming up on Shrewd Wife Life. Hi there, I'm Lillian. Welcome to my channel. Here I help Christian wives heal their femininity so they can stop thinking like sons of God and start embodying their lives like his daughters. I talk about my own journey and how healing my feminine heart led me to the discovery that I was married to a type 3 man. That's the type of man that's a Nabal. If you don't know if you're married to a type 1, 2, or a 3 husband, you can find a link for that in the description box. Do you want to learn how to understand God's word as a woman, heal yourself by his sanctification, and possibly transform your marriage by faith and knowledge? Then this is the place for you. Welcome back to Shrewd Wife Life. Today I want to lay a foundation, a lens, a way to rightly divide what marriage is supposed to be. Because until you understand this, nothing else about emotional safety, sex, or trust will make sense. And it's probably the most important baseline I can give you before we go deeper into sexuality and the nervous system. And that's what I want to cover in part 2. In this video, you'll learn that there are 2 distinct components to marriage. Why blurring the 2 sides of marriage creates spiritual and emotional devastation. How the role of the wife traps a woman's femininity inside duty and role play. And in the absence of masculine initiation, a woman's femininity is drained until there's nothing left to give. So let's get started. There are 2 sides to marriage, and they're completely different. You can't blend them together without having devastating effects. When you take the structure from the roles that are called husband and wife and force them on top of the space where intimacy, connection, and emotional safety between a man and woman are supposed to live, you don't just create dysfunction, you create spiritual confusion. You distort God's design and you open the door to deception. And this is what I really want you to get. The confusion that comes from blending the roles on top of a relationship, that's the number one way a wolf hides. Now, not every husband who believes this ideology about marriage is a wolf, but every wolf, he operates this way. It's how they appear to be spiritual, but in the background, they're increasing power over their wife. It's how they demand submission from her, but at the same time, they refuse to be accountable for themselves. It's how this kind of husband makes his wife feel like she's the one who's resisting God, when in reality, her soul is sounding an alarm through her body. That's why this teaching matters so deeply to me, because if you don't know how to rightly divide the structure of marriage away from the one flesh relationship, you'll keep trying to be a godly wife in a system that was never godly to begin with. If you've never heard this before, buckle up, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. On one side of marriage is where we find the hierarchy. It's the structure, the offices. This is where there's a leader and there's a follower. I'm intentionally using the word follower here because I want to make a point. The word that's been translated as submission is most commonly taught that it means a wife's got to follow her husband in the same way that a servant follows a master. She's got to be passive with an obedience that's unwavering, and she can't ask too many questions. That's what the English translators have intended, that a wife submits by following her husband's leadership and doing it without spiritual awareness, without tracking his example or discerning his attitude. In practice, what that sounds like is follow what he says, don't do what he does. But here's the thing. The word follow actually has 2 meanings. If you interpret it as a verb, like an action, you'll internalize submission as if it's passive movement or blind obedience. But if you understand it as a noun, your interpretation of submission becomes about where and how you position yourself. One definition is about movement or action, and the other is about posture and alignment. That distinction is exactly what Vine's dictionary highlights. The Greek word hupotasso, which is translated submission, is a military term. It means to arrange under and take your place within a structured order. But in non-military settings like work or marriage, the tone changes completely. Vines describes it as a voluntary attitude of cooperation, shared responsibility, and alignment. So in marriage, submission isn't about movement, it's about placement. It's not about activity, it's about alignment, and that changes everything. A wife's submission isn't about a movement that trails behind in obedience. It's about reflecting an alignment. She follows by mirroring her husband's visible submission to God. If that alignment's clear, she can reflect it. But if it's missing, there's nothing to mirror. God has designed the wife's submission so that it doesn't operate in a vacuum, detached from her husband. She's not commanded to follow a man. She's commanded to follow or to align under his submission to the Lord. What does that look like? It looks like this. If a man is submitted 85% to the Lord in his role as a husband, that becomes the pattern his wife aligns with. So she's able to reflect in her submission up to that same 85%. But if he's only submitted 15% or even less, that's all she can mirror. A wife can align herself under what isn't there. In this structure, it's the husband who carries the responsibility for leadership by demonstrating his submission to Christ, who's the head of both of them, and the wife's responsible for the role of submission. It's not about personal worth. It's about assuming responsibility for your obligations in a partnership, and that's all it's about. Leadership and submission aren't equals. They're aligned. Each reflects a different responsibility in the structure God designed. There's a business side to marriage, just like there's a business side to any mission or ministry work. And marriage is first and foremost a mission work. It's to make Christ and his church visible to the world. Colossians 1, verse 15, Hebrews 1, verse 3, and Ephesians 5, verse 32. Think of marriage like a ministry team. Someone leads and someone follows, not because the man is superior, but because of the quality and position of the responsibility that God placed on the man so that the mission can function. The bills have to be paid and decisions have to be made. Someone has to be held accountable for all of that. And God made it clear that it was going to be his sons, not his daughters. That's what this structure's for. It's not personal. It's practical. It's not an interdependent relationship. It's a partnership. And this side of marriage runs like a divine household management system. It's the business side of marriage, and it's made up of static functions and agreements, obligations that are fixed, not fluid. You can negotiate the terms within God's framework, but there's very little room for personal interpretation in these roles because the tasks are defined by necessity, not personality. Someone has to organize doctor's appointments and plan the birthday parties. Someone's got to buy the groceries and take the kids to soccer practice. Someone's got to cut the lawn. These aren't relational exchanges between two people. They're not emotionally charged choices. They're closed-end tasks. They come with an expiration date. They have to be done in order for the household and family to function. This side of marriage exists to carry the weight of all those responsibilities so that the relationship side can be free of structural demands so that it can flourish and expand. But here's the mistake. When the dynamics of a wife's role gets pulled into the relationship side of marriage, the leadership turns controlling and oppressive. The partnership model disintegrates into a demonstration of dysfunction and codependence, and the one flesh relationship starts to break apart and die. Now, with the relationship side of marriage, it's not rooted in structural function, partnership, performance, or any obligations that are driven by duty. This is where the real marriage happens. And it's an entirely different dynamic than the hierarchical structure of the roles. It's where God uses the masculine and feminine polarity to create the one flesh relationship. Here, the husband isn't just the leader, he's the head and source as well. Adam was the source material for Eve's creation, and Jesus is the source of life and nourishment for the church. That's what headship means in the one flesh relationship. Not command and not control, but offering, initiating, and masculine contribution. Notice Adam wasn't the source to create a wife. God didn't use one role to create another role. He used a man to create a woman. That's what we're talking about on the relationship side. A man and a woman. Masculine form and feminine form. The husband still carries the role of leadership in the structure of the marriage. He doesn't stop being the leader. But in this space, his presence matters more than the position because he's something completely different. The structure is the fixed side. It runs on alignment and function. But on the relationship side, it's alive. It grows, it shifts, it responds. This is the part where the marriage breathes. And that's why it needs nourishment, presence, and honest connection. It's like a body, not like a blueprint of a hierarchy. A man provides his masculine presence and provision. He brings a willingness to initiate emotionally within relational connection and spirituality. And the wife, she provides a feminine response to his initiation, not because she's commanded to or because it's a requirement from duty, but because God created her femininity to respond and attach to the efforts that she receives from whatever the intentionality is that masculinity initiates. This is the side of marriage where friendship lives. And at the core of marriage, that's what's there, a friendship between a man and a woman. That friendship began as a foundation, but then after marriage, that same friendship changes into a one flesh relationship. The moment the marriage is consummated, that's when the covenant is born. All friendships change and grow through emotional presence and spiritual vulnerability and relational safety. But a one flesh relationship is set apart from every other friendship by the masculine connection and feminine attachment. And when that polarity is healthy, it culminates in the highest expression of friendship between a man and a woman, sexuality. But it's because his initiation is consistent and his care is genuine. So if it's real and he's not a wolf, he'll draw out her feminine response. He doesn't demand and he doesn't pressure. He pulls her femininity towards him. Because in a one flesh relationship, the marriage doesn't grow by fulfilling the obligations in the roles. It grows because it's alive, and it stays alive through the reciprocity that's being nurtured by the masculine provision and the feminine response. When you look at any ordinary friendship, you know as well as I do There's no relationship of any kind that would survive if you forced a hierarchical structure onto it. If you tried to superimpose the parameters of leadership and submission into every moment of your friendship, those friendships would fall apart. That kind of control, it eliminates attachment by crushing connection. But that's exactly what traditional Christian teachings have done to marriage. They've stripped out the one flesh connection that Christ modeled through his friendship with the apostles, and they've replaced it with a hierarchical ideology that mirrors the red pill movement more than it does the gospel. I'm not going to dive too deep into that comparison in this video, but I've got one coming that does. So for now, I'll say this. When advice that's supposed to be godly starts lining up perfectly with secular ideology, that is a big flaming red flag. It means we've got to take a step back and ask, who is this actually serving? Because it's not God. Both of them have the same deceptive dogma. They've taken a relationship and circumvented it with the roles and then renamed it marriage. Both of them want you to believe that this is what marriage is, but you know what? It's not. What it is a paradigm, a male-centric structure that looks like marriage on the outside, but on the inside, it's lifeless. If a one-flesh relationship isn't being nurtured, then it's either dying or it's already dead. Like the whitewashed tombs Jesus described in Matthew 23, verse 27. Even worse. Can it get worse? Yeah, it can get worse. You've heard of trad wives? The red pill movement came first out of the manosphere spaces in the late 2000s. It's a framework built around dominance, hierarchy, control, and male entitlement. It talks a lot about alpha males, sexual strategy, and female submission. And it's been titrated into Christian culture under the guise of godly order. The trad wife movement came later, around 2018-ish. It's a new step for a new generation of younger wives, and it works best on the not so spiritually discerning. And remember, I'm not throwing shade here. I bought into it. This movement is just another way to show women how to contort themselves so that they can appease, please, or pacify masculinity that's emotionally stunted, spiritually stagnant, or overtly neglectful and harmful. It isn't about true femininity. It's about survival. Red pill sells power to men by appealing to the fact that they're bigger and stronger and more aggressive than women. Tradwifery sells by packaging itself in vintage dresses, slow living, and homemaking. But it's done in a way that romanticizes subordination of autonomy and sexual availability, just like red pill ideology, but with a softer, more palatable rebranding. I know that both of those movements are worldly, and as believers, we're not supposed to be concerned with what the world does because it's God's business. 1 Corinthians 5, verses 12 through 13, and John 18, verse 36. But my contention is the false believers that invite the ideologies to cross over into the churches and then reframe them like they're godly. No wonder so many Christian wives are disillusioned. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. Because even though it's called marriage, it's not a one-flesh relationship. It's all performance-based. And that's what slowly starves the feminine heart. And somewhere in all that confusion, wives keep hoping it will somehow work. I know, because that's exactly what I kept hoping for. If I could just do it better, be a better wife. If I could be more obedient, more sacrificial, more supportive, more submissive. If I could just do more, then maybe the marriage would come alive. But it didn't. And it's not that I didn't try. It's because what I was trying to fix was the thing that was never supposed to carry the weight of the relationship in the first place. So now we need to look at why it doesn't work. Traditional Christian marriage teachings have completely blurred the two sides of marriage by taking submission from where it belongs on the side with leadership in the hierarchical structure, and they've dragged it into the relational side. That pattern, along with both of those secular movements, have all made the same critical error. They've confused the creation order with the covenant order. They've blended a woman's ontology with the functional role of wifery. This has created a false narrative that a woman is required to submit to a man simply because she's a woman. But nowhere in Scripture are women called to submit carte blanche to men. Submission isn't an ontological requirement tied to the fact that she's been created as a female. Submission is nothing more than an alignment of the roles that are on the partnership side of marriage. And when the distinction between the roles in a relationship is lost, it leads to a devastatingly confusing and highly misogynistic view. Women begin to believe that their femininity itself is expressed through subordination to masculinity, rather than understanding that their submission operates within very tight parameters designed by God. And nowhere is that distortion more easily seen than what's expected sexually. A lot of Christian wives don't realize that the idea of husband privileges, this unspoken belief that a man is entitled to sex just because he's married, isn't biblical. It's a projection from the premarital sex culture into the covenant of marriage. When couples have sex before marriage, we frame that as giving him husband privileges. So what happens is once they're actually married, it's assumed that those privileges are now permanent. That subversive message is no different than the Christian one that's couched in saving it for marriage. It says he's now got automatic access to her body and her time, that there's no more masculine relational effort required after marriage, because all of that was poured in to arrive at the marriage. So there's no more investment needed, no more initiation or intentional connection. That mentality shifts everything in the marriage. It turns sex into a transaction, not a response to masculine provision. It creates a taking mindset in a man instead of a serving one. And the feminine creature, she wasn't designed for that. She wasn't designed to be extracted from. The body exists to be nourished by the head. A woman wasn't created because Adam lacked help in the form of productivity or efficiency. She was created because he lacked something to pour into. That's why it wasn't good for him to be alone. This design shows us the pattern that God intended in the one flesh relationship. Masculinity receives by giving. That's how the head nourishes the body. But with femininity, she doesn't receive by doing. She responds to what's being given. That's the polarity. It's not interchangeable. Extraction violates this entire pattern, and it's completely opposite to how Christ modeled marriage in Ephesians 5, verse 29. He loves her as his own body. A husband gives to himself through the act of providing his masculinity to her. That's how he serves. When that gets inverted and the husband wants to extract from the wife by her serving him, a woman might be able to sustain this inversion for 5, maybe 6 or 7 years, giving herself over to be extracted from while receiving little to nothing. But eventually she runs dry. When femininity's got nothing left to give, it's not that she's withholding. It means she's empty, used up, burned out. And by burned out, I mean there is 0 desire left for sex with her husband because he's used it all up on himself instead of investing, initiating, and nourishing her femininity to create more desire in his wife. So in traditional Christian teaching on marriage, that's why so many wives end up feeling like the only way to survive is to function like a man. Every moment in the life of a wife's existence has been turned into an opportunity to perform respect. She's taught that her only option is to receive, because that's what God commands in Ephesians 5:33, regardless of whether or not her husband's initiating anything that's worth receiving. But here's the truth. Respecting a man who's unloving, cruel, or emotionally neglectful, it doesn't grow love in him for her. It breeds contempt. Masculine hearts aren't won over by passive reverence. They're ignited when they do duty and service. Love a woman well, like she's your own body, and she will reflect respect back. Sorry, Mr. Egerich, but you only got it half right. Love does equal respect, but respect does not always equal love. You can't just invert that theory and expect it to work in the feminine. If you do that, you end up trapping her femininity inside her female body. And this theory renders a woman powerless and voiceless by literally locking her into the hierarchical structure while letting him off the hook. The roles stay in place, but the responsibility aspect for him disappears. In the one-flesh relationship, the husband's responsibility is to initiate with intentionality and to provide emotional, spiritual, and relationship connection. When he does this, he proves to his wife that his masculinity is a safe and grounded place for her femininity to respond in, and that's her responsibility. And here's the key. For a one-flesh relationship, she doesn't submit to this. It's a response. Submission is about role-based function, but response is about feminine design. You can't respond to what's not present. You can't receive when nothing's being offered towards you. And you can't be emotionally open to a man you don't trust. And your body will not respond sexually to a man you don't feel 100% safe around. That's not stubbornness, and it's not rebellion. It's not withholding, and it's not disrespect. It's your nervous system doing what God created it to do. Most Christian wives are stuck because they've been taught to integrate both sides of marriage together. They think they're being disobedient or ungodly when they feel a lack of intimacy and don't want to have sex, and when there's an increasing resistance in their body or emotional detachment. So they live in this constant, horrible tension of self-blame. It's a cycle of unclarity, uncertainty, and self-guessing. It becomes like a revolving internal conversation. Good wife, bad wife, good wife, bad wife again. Because they've never been told that submission only applies to the office of wife. It has no business being in a one-flesh relationship. The side of marriage where a one-flesh relationship lives isn't built on the same commands and obligations that you'd find in a partnership agreement. It's built on connection and attachment. And feminine attachment can't be forced, and it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Masculine connection has to be offered through intentional initiation. Without that, the polarity can't start. To wrap up, I want you to know this matters so much to me. If you've been struggling to feel emotionally safe with your husband, if you've been told to keep submitting, keep giving, to push past your negative feelings by respecting him, or that if you just start doing sex, the desire will follow, but your body's tense and your heart is closed and you feel like you're disappearing inside the marriage, you are not rebellious. You're not a bad wife, and you're not crazy. What's happening is this: the relationship side of your marriage, the part that's meant to be intimate, emotional, and alive, has been swallowed up by the structure in the hierarchy. You're being asked to live as if a one-flesh relationship is happening, but it's not. And your body can feel that disingenuousness. So you pretend. You force a smile. You try and convince yourself it's fine. It's all good. But each year it gets lonelier and a little bit more ickier. Because each year you see more and more of the structure, more of the roles and expectations on you. The masculine needs and requirements are still very present in the marriage, and your femininity has been buried just a little bit more underneath the weight of all of his testosterone that's sitting above you instead of blessing you with its strength. Earlier when I said most women can only do this for about 5 years, it's because that's about how long you can survive while your heart and body are split apart from each other. You weren't created to compartmentalize. You were designed to operate as a whole, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And it takes everything in you to keep going when that design has been violated. Coming up in part 2, I'm going to talk about how emotional safety, sexual intimacy, and the feminine nervous system are all wired together by God. We'll look at why the word submission doesn't belong in the bedroom or in any part of the relationship at all, and why your body knows it, even if your theology hasn't given you permission to freely feel it. So if that's you, if you've ever wondered why you can't relax into sex, or why something just feels off, no matter how hard you try to be the good wife, you'll want to join me for part 2. If this content has touched something in you, if your body feels the truth even before your mind can name it, that's not rebellion. That's the beginning of clarity, of healing, of coming out of hiding. Click like if this stirred something in you. Subscribe if you're done performing, and share this with a wife who needs to know she's not crazy. She's not bad. She's exhausted from carrying a marriage that God never asked her to carry. Bye for now, and I'll see you in the next one.